All right, we're going. We are live. All right. Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Practical Dev Twitch stream. My name's Nick Taylor. I'm a senior software engineer at Forum, the software that powers dev. And I'm here with not just one, two of my awesome coworkers today. I'm here with Christina Gordon, who you know, but let's let her say a little bit about herself. Hey, Christina.
Hello, I am the open source community manager here at Dev, and I started about a month ago. We've been doing all of these streams for Hacktoberfest and beyond we would like to do, so that's why we're here today.
Cool, cool. And also have my other awesome coworker, Lisa C. Lisa, do you want to just say a few things about yourself? Let everybody know who you are.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a lead product designer at Forum Dev. I go by she, her pronouns, and I've been with the company since January when it was Dev, and then I
Yeah,
became
yeah,
Forum. So we
yeah,
can talk about.
yeah. We're all kind of new here because I started in January too, and then Christina started just over a month now, or a month about.
Yeah, I think it's a month tomorrow. No, today, a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today we're doing a series on Wednesdays called Walkthrough Wednesdays. It can be technical stuff like diving into code. It can be talking about pretty much anything, honestly. And today we're here with Lisa, as we mentioned. She's the lead product designer at Forum. And we threw out an AMA, Ask Me Anything on Dev. I'll let Christina throw that link in the chat. We have a bunch of questions in there already, and I think the way we're going to proceed is Christina's going to just go through some of the questions and throw them over to Lisa, and we'll just get organic from there, I guess, and see what happens.
Yeah, and if
So,
you have questions and you're in the chat and you want to ask them, you can put them in and we can try to kind of put them in at the same time. So, yeah, Lisa, first question so that we get a little bit more information from you. Ben Halpern asked, can you tell us about your journey to get here as a designer for Forum? What professional or personal experiences influenced you the most along the way?
Cool. Okay, let's time travel a little bit. Okay, so
I
back
didn't know we were going
when
to
I
time
was
travel. That's wild.
all the
Nice.
Time
way to,
traveling.
let's say,
The Wayback
high
Machine.
high school university era. So I guess like I've always been interested in fine art, growing up my entire life. And I think it was in middle school, high school where I started to get into digital design, aka through GeoCities and Angel Flyer and updating my
Nice.
AIM buddy profile. And I believe it was in GeoCities that I wrote like my first HTML. It was in
Okay.
the index dot in HTML file that it comes automated with, and that's how I
Yeah.
learned what that was, and I learned what a link was because a link takes you into another thing. Um, but like I think like a lot of kids, you grow up, experimenting with art, experimenting with making things, trying different things, being kind of weird, being a weirdo, us little kids. But I really think like as you get older, that gets kind of knocked out of you, and you're kind of expected to kind of fit more into a different mold. And so, like, when I was going into university, I would always ask myself, like, okay, like, I am interested in this art thing, but I'm not really sure, like, what it means to make a career out of that because I wasn't sure what was possible.
Yeah.
And it was around that time where I began to learn more about graphic design because up to that point, I was just drawing a lot and was really into that. But I thought like I wanted to turn that into something that would make more sense as a profession eventually. Because I
Okay.
also entered university like at in 2009, so it was like right after the recession. So there was a lot of uncertainties there. Like I majored in the humanities, and I saw like how hard it was to like get internships or to just look around, online and to see that there weren't a lot of opportunities. So I thought, okay, well, I have this art thing. I would just want to learn graphic design because I've heard of what that is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, do you know, there are just a lot of internet tutorials on how to teach people Photoshop, like PSD tuts. If you're
Okay.
familiar with that whole, like, the dot
Mhm.
tuts, net
Oh yeah.
tuts.
Yeah.
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 Two
So,
tots.
yeah,
Two
so
times.
many tuts. Yeah, so I was like learning Photoshop, and after a certain while, like I was just trying different things. They all kind of looked weird. Photoshop is a pain to use,
Yeah.
but it was like doing the
Yeah.
um. And then there was a certain point where I was like, oh, this is fun. I was beginning to gain traction with Photoshop and learning graphic design. I began to volunteer making, flyers for my friends' theater shows and for their music shows.
Mhm.
So my story is also pretty typical of like a lot of people I hear who get into design. It's like they
Yeah.
start with, very helping their friends out with their
Yeah.
website or their band.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then I thought like, oh, this is so cool. Like, look at what I'm doing on Photoshop. What would it be like if I put this onto a website so that any of my friends could just open their computer up, go to this random domain and like see this thing that I made? And
Yeah.
so I began learning about web design because with the PSD Tuts world,
Yeah.
it teaches you not only Photoshop, but it also teaches you like web design and other types of things. And so once you're like looking at, once you're involved with one community, you see links that would take you to another community, like ads for learn about web design. So
Okay.
I just like organically got into that, and that's where I, took the HTML skills that I had learned previously from GeoCities and resurrected it using Dreamweaver, which was
Oh yeah.
interesting.
I remember
That was
Dreamweaver and fireworks and all the Macromedia stuff.
Yeah, I tried everything. Fireworks, I
Yeah.
remember that because that was the software that you were supposed to use when it came to creating mockups. Um, so funny thinking back of like how much work it took to make a skeuomorphic looking thing because you had to do it all like in Photoshop. You couldn't really do it in CSS yet. Like there was no sense of like manipulating something visually in CSS, like
Yeah.
with like gradients and like box shadows to make it look like a real.
Okay, so
Um,
Lisa, what is skeuomorphic then? So I think you're kind of touching it there, but just for anyone who might not know, can you say a little bit about what that is before you keep
Yeah.
going?
yeah, from my
No.
understanding, you can wait, Nick. If we can both. Do you want to chime in?
No. I was gonna say I was gonna say I nodded to look cool, like I knew what you were talking about, and I have no idea what it means.
Fair.
I think I do, but I'm not sure, and I'm never afraid to ask, so I'm okay. Go for it.
Okay, so if you imagine a time before all of the digital tools we used involved around a screen interface, they revolved around it still like an interface, but it was like physical buttons that you can press to control something. Like for example, imagine that you had like a camera, and if you wanted to take a picture, you would actually press down this button, and because of the hardware inside of it, it connected to something else that would eventually like snap that picture for you. And
Okay.
when we have these buttons, it's a way for people to use something and to get feedback that it's working the way that they expect it to.
Yeah.
And when we translated all of these tools that used to be physical tools, like a camera or like an ATM machine with like physical buttons you can press, or like a
Yeah.
remote control,
Yeah.
into like a flat screen interface, you still want to make sure that people have this sense of feedback that and um, and delight that came from like pressing something physical.
Yeah.
Um, and skeuomorphic is the type of design that replicates that 3D element even
Yeah.
within a 2D interface to make it seem
Okay.
more real. So I think this kind of came about when the first iPhone came out, And Steve Jobs came out with all of those little like icons that feels like it looks like candy that you can touch,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that was a way to make it most resemble our expectations of what buttons should do. And of course, like over the past decade, there's been this, moving
Flat
away.
design and
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there
So
was
yeah,
Go ahead, Lisa.
it was cool, like to see like the whole trends, because it's funny to
Yeah.
answer this question, because I'm going backwards, and it's like this is the time of like Adobe really owning that whole space around design. And at that point, there wasn't even a concept called product design, because I feel like at that point in time, and even before, like when I talk to some of my friends who've done development for like 2 decades, they would say like back in the day when they were starting off as engineers, they were also designers. And I think when I began to enter this field through these web tutorials, it first was all about web design, and then it eventually became like, here's UX design and here's UI design.
Yeah.
And now we have this idea of product designer, which is a more generalist skill set, where you are able to kind of cover the basics of visual design, user experience design, and tying it to what the user needs, and also how the business can benefit from the things that we are working on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a quick question, Lisa. It's more just to clarify some of the things you said for all the folks out there, in case some of it's not clear. But uh, in your own words, like, could you explain UX versus like UI and design? Because I think they all get intermingled or just thrown in, and I've worked at places where there is literally just a UX designer, and then there's also a designer, and then so.
Yeah, absolutely. And this comes up a lot with people that I chat with. UI design means user interface design. UX design is user experience design. And the only difference between them is the second letter. I'm just kidding.
That's it. That's the stream. We're done.
I saw that joke on Twitter. I wanted to read. Um, user, so user interface design is the specialty of making sure that the visual design of the interface works well for how the person who receives it will use it. So a lot of that means, having really strong visual design communication skills, having good sense around like the fundamentals of art, which include color theory, typography, understanding grids, understanding how things fit together. It's really important to have like just a really keen eye for things visually. And I think if you want to see excellent UI design, I would say look at Apple, because everything that they do is just it's really meticulous. And I think that they put a lot of thought into how everything comes together. And I think how you can tell that you have good UI design in front of you is when you look at something and it just feels like there's a really strong balance across the board. And you should never be confused when you're looking at something. Like it feels like things are falling into the right place when you're looking at it and when your brain is receiving that information back.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's true what you say about Apple. Sorry, go ahead, Christina.
Nope, go ahead. I'll go after you.
I'll go ahead.
I was gonna say I was on the Apple site the other day, and they use animations in a smart way. Like me and Christina talked about this the other. I don't really have a lot of animation experience, but from the book I read by Rachel Neighbors, the name's escaping me again.
It's Animation at Work.
Yeah, yeah. Like the premise is, well, not the premise. One of the points that stood out in that for me was just you don't use animations just to say, hey, here's a cool effect, And I find on the Apple site, I was scrolling down I think it was through the MacBook or no iPads or something, and as you scroll down, like the laptop would open on the MacBook page, but like not in a clunky way. It was like as you scroll down, they know where you are in the page, and it's like they're talking about it, and then it opens up as they're talking about it, and it's kind of what you were saying, that like they really know what they're doing, and
Yeah.
The other site that stands out for me is the Stripe homepage. They
Yeah.
did a redesign recently with like a rotating globe and
I feel like
some
everyone waits for Stripe's new design to come out.
yeah.
Stripe,
Yeah,
yeah.
I look at that stuff and then I'm like, I'm not I shouldn't be doing that. But
No, yeah.
I think this is good though, because just for background for other people and for you, Lisa, like I do a lot of front end, but I do a lot of animation, and I do a lot of animation in the sense of like how can I make stuff good for the user. So it's good hearing these like words and things that you're saying and kind of putting it together of like, oh, that's why I do that, like talking about like animation choreography and stuff, and not just using animation for like, hey, let me put animation out there, but to guide a user and to help a user and stuff like that. And so hearing all these extra things from your background it's nice to put that together. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, totally. Because, preceding all of these roles were just this principle of design, which is, I don't know, I guess through the majority of the, 20th century was just graphic design, which is all about communicating. A lot of this is rooted in print design, which is like what people
Yeah.
relied on to receive information, right? And so
Yeah.
now we're bringing that to an interactive format. And now we can do things like animation to kind of communicate that, this new feature with the iPad and what it does in this, even more special way. But also like, you both bring up these different marketing pages with Apple and Stripes makes me want to throw another wrench in this conversation, which is like the field of design today in the tech industry has so many types of different roles and specialties. Like I'm imagining at these companies, the people that are designing this aren't UI designers or UX designers or product designers. They're likely either communication designers or marketing designers, and their specific specialty is working with language and the visuals to kind of communicate like, look at this new iPhone that we have, 5G, oh my God.
yeah,
And I want to bring that up because when I mention UI designers, their specific specialty is working within like that app itself and that container. So what I see is that in the different places I worked at, with a lot of these, types of services, there's usually a
yeah,
logged out version, which is the marketing page, and then there's a logged in version. And how I see it is that the logged out version, you're likely working with marketing people, sales people to define all of that. There's probably a
yeah,
designer that's tied to that. And then when you're in the logged in experience, that's where you're working more with like UX designers, UI designers, product designers, because we're defining like with the engineers kind of the mechanics of how that thing actually functions.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also like what you said before, how when you're designing the UI, if it's confusing to a user, it's clearly not good. But like I've been on like so many websites and I'm like, uh, what's going on? And like one thing I can think of recently, I forget which site it was, but I wasn't logged in, I think. But the default was to create a login, and I do this all the time. I log in through the sign up, and then it clearly says that either that password
Yeah.
is or that username's taken or whatever, and then I see the login under because like I guess it's kind of what you're saying, like the logged out experience. Marketing's trying to get customers, but I'm a
Mm-hmm.
returning customer, so I'm like I have to go click on the little call to action that doesn't really have a lot of prominence. So
Mm-hmm.
that's just something I've noticed on a bunch of sites. So I get confused even though I know it's like I still get confused every time that happens to me. So it's just interesting.
Uh, Lisa, I have two quick questions in the chat before we get on to the other questions in the AMA. Just because we were on this topic, is it scomorphic? Was that what you said it was? Scomorphic? Yeah, okay. What are your thoughts on neomorphism, the newer, not newer because it came back, but what people are doing now, neomorphism in design? I don't know if you know that or if you have any thoughts on that.
Um, I don't know what that is. Yeah, I
I
don't.
can I
I
can share a link with you at some point, and then you can
Yeah.
let us know what you think. I've seen it a lot on CodePen recently. A lot of people were like
I'm
getting
gonna
back into
Google it and pretend I know what it is.
it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
neomorphism.
Yeah.
Oh
I
yeah,
find it
I
like,
remember seeing this site. I'm
Yeah,
on
it's where it
CSS.
looks like almost like you have like buttons or something there, but they're like really blended in.
Yeah, it's not like
So
material design where everything's flat. It's everything's elevated, and
I
there's shadowing around all the
mm,
components.
I see.
It,
yeah.
there's a site
I
that came out like a month or two ago. It was like a neomorphism generator. I forget the link to it, but
yeah.
it looked exactly like I saw in the CSS tricks. It's kind of like a grayish blue with all the raised pieces,
I
and
see.
I guess that
Yeah.
kind of ties into what you were saying, like the old
Mhm.
school, like pushing the buttons and stuff.
Mhm.
And I mean we have that out of the box too with like semantic elements, like the button, like when you click on it, you get that
Mhm.
little press down kind of look, like the default style and stuff. So
Yeah.
Sure. I find that because okay, so there was UI design and then there's UX design, which is like how someone experiences the entire thing so that works. Like
Yeah.
Nick, you talking about how you had trouble like logging in as an example of like, poor UX design and not thinking of the holistic journey of you trying to sign up. But
yeah,
you can see how they all kind of tie together, right? UI design and UX design. And it's so sometimes it's kind of hard to separate the two things because ultimately like how things look and how things work tie in with each other, which is why I think product design is an awesome field because it's a very generalist approach at bringing all those things together. And
yeah,
as a product designer, like I think like if you ask a UI designer where that's their specialty about some of these questions like skeuomorphic, neumorphic, they might have more thoughts on that. But for me as a product designer, I think I see my role as like I just want to do the thing that makes sense for people, they
Yeah.
understand it. Sure, it could
yeah,
follow like the I think I know what you're talking about with neomorphic. I see it. I see Apple usually leading the industry in new motifs that they showcase in new OS updates, and it seems like
Mhm.
everything follows. And I believe in following trends to the extent that people who use the tools that I design will continue to understand how they work. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to like, recreate wheels if it's like gonna
Yeah.
add confusion, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I also see like Apple doing that because it could be the case that when it came to flattening everything, we all realized that across the board, in the sphere of the internet, everything just began to look alike and there was no sense of uniqueness. So let's bring something different back now. Let's bring these
Yeah.
buttons back again that makes people feel like they're a part of it.
yeah,
But I
Yeah.
do wonder, like, we're gonna probably hit this point again in over the next few years where everything's gonna be neomorphic then, and then we're gonna be like, huh, no, everything looks like Apple. Now what are we gonna
Yeah.
do?
yeah,
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
this keeps happening, right?
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
think there's also a big accessibility issue with the neomorphism too. A lot of people talk about because it while it's cool looking and that you got that kind of squishy feel, and depending on how you do kind of those box shadows, you can see it well, but a lot of people can't differentiate like the it
yeah.
at all. And so like my husband's colorblind for most of that stuff. He wouldn't be able to see like what am I pressing? There's a button here
Yeah,
or something
just
like
press all the buttons. I don't know.
yeah.
Hopefully it works.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah,
I would say that that is sometimes like in some ways, like it's kind of the downfall sometimes of, being a designer because,
Mhm.
you might some, and I've done this in the past where, sometimes like I have this idea that I'm really committed to because I think it looks cool, but it's only until you look at it through accessibility lens that you realize, oh crap, these color combinations do not work at all, or you
yeah,
had this idea for a button and you want to implement it this way, but how does this
Yeah.
translate in another language where the string like does something like it's really long and the button becomes like tall? Like that's your design now.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think designers sometimes get really committed to like the ideal situation, but this is where we have engineers to like check with us like, hey,
yeah,
there's this error state you should be thinking about. There's a scenario that you should be thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and people are dropping
yeah.
some good links in here on accessibility and stuff. There was another question. I don't know how much you do with animation, Lisa, but there was any thoughts on how to balance animation with web accessibility? I just finished a course on this, so if you don't have thoughts, I can put a little. But we did talk about this actually last week, anyway.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, like I think this is one area. I'm not an expert in this animations and accessibility at all. I think this is where I look to the engineers to help me. I think, how I work with developers, especially in environments where I'm not implementing the code at all, is I might create a prototype of that animation, and then they would implement it, and then that's where like part of their job responsibilities is making sure that it kind of works well accessibility wise. And if they are pushing back on me on something, then that's where I would work with them and try to resolve it, because again, it's really hard to like be expert of this whole thing, because like I was mentioning, the different areas within design, like they're all kind of specialties to an extent, pretty similar to like with engineering. You have people are front end developers and specialize in accessibility, or specialize in design, which sounds kind of weird, but yes, that exists, or specialize in design systems. It's pretty similar on the other side of the equation with designers as well.
Definitely. And I mean, I think that even what you said there is a good point, though. Just being aware as like developers that we need to have good communication with our designers and designers with developers, because there are some times where one or the other is going to have to push back. Like I know with animations, I had this wonderful designer who I got to work with on this like game, and she always wanted these like over the top animations, which would have been fun for me to do, right? But I'd always have to be like, this is probably a lot and like too much for like, and so we would talk through and come up with like a balance, like, yeah, this is great. And I could take what she had and pull back from it, right? And be like, okay, and this would probably be better for the user if we did it this way. So yeah, I think even just there, whether you have a lot of information on accessibility with animations or not, I think that was the good point there, is just good communication between developers and designers.
What are your experiences working with designers and what you value in working with them?
Yeah, so for me, and then Nick, if you want to talk about it too, you can go. For me, I actually, because I did a lot of just front end, I work with a lot of designers pretty closely, because I was doing a lot of, either I was the person that they saw was like a designer if the team didn't have a designer, which I'm not at all. But so sometimes it was that. But I actually love working with designers because like we kind of touched before, you have this like knowledge, this background knowledge of like why we're doing these things. Like I can implement them and I know like why I should be doing them, but I don't have like all the words for it and exactly why we should be doing it. And so I like communicating with the designers if I'm on a team. Like that was something when I was looking for front end jobs that I would ask, like, hey, do I get to work with the designer? Do we, how does that balance work? How are we going to talk? And that's usually what I did on teams, was that it was a lot of back and forth between me and the designer. I was on smaller teams a lot of times, so I could do that. Like it's different if you're on a bigger team, like designers and then like the front end. But yeah, I did a lot of communication with designers, and it was a lot of that. Just like I would get their designs. Sometimes they'd be really awesome or fun. And then when I go to implement them, I'd be like, hey, this is where we might want to consider something else, or this is not the best way to do this, or hey, could we change this color just a little bit because it's not accessible or something like that.
I'm it's kind of interesting because I only really became full, like I went all in on front end in like 2016. Before that, I typically worked at smaller companies, so I kind of did everything. But it was only really the last 2 or 3 jobs that have worked with designers, and like I can kind of speak more recently with about, like, I haven't worked with Lisa as much, but we have Pavel as well, who's our other product designer. I've worked with him more than Lisa, not for no particular reason. It just, that's the way the work fell, I guess. But no, we typically, it's just a lot of discussions. We'll sync up on a Zoom, or we'll go through a Figma. He'll kind of explain the user experience journey, and I might have some technical questions in terms of feasibility of some things. And just the nature of our team here is like we work asynchronously, and a lot of it's out in the open. So you'll see conversations between myself and him in GitHub issues or pull requests. And I just like, I don't know. I'm able to put what a designer makes into web form, but I know I'm not that great at design. Like I think I have some UX chops and some okay ideas of color and stuff, but like for me it's just been really, I don't know, interesting to just learning from the designers, and like because I do want to get better at those things. I don't want to be a designer, but I know having more information about the field I'm in, the better for me, because then in future work I can have more valuable input and stuff. So I've just been enjoying a lot of the conversations with yourself and Pavel. Honestly, it's I've been finding it great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, for anyone watching, we probably won't get to touch on it today, but we talked to Lisa about this, and we'd love for her to come on again at some point and kind of talk about just tips for developers on like, what are some things you can do for easy wins for design and having better designs, and also working with something like Figma. So we do want Lisa to come back on, and we might get to touch on that a little today.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I I had one kind of thing, like I know it's a question I probably should have put in the AMA yesterday, but things kind of went from pixel perfect to more fluid design, and I think that just changed. Like I remember, like if you if you go with like Dreamweaver and stuff, you'd have spacer gifts, things would be in tables, just so like everything, like literally like a jigsaw puzzle, and like it fit exactly. Whereas we have stuff like CSS Grid and Flexbox now, which are Flexbox has great support now. CSS Grid is pretty solid too now. Not for older browsers like IE and stuff, but it's like, I mean, when I say it's not pixel perfect, I mean we're still making nice designs, but they're able to kind of adjust as well. And it, I I don't know when that shift happened, but it did happen. If somebody has a date, I feel like Todd in the chat would probably know.
I think
But
Lisa's got some information there. No, go ahead,
okay,
Lisa.
so you're talking about that age Dreamweaver where everything was fixed, and that was how we all designed in Fireworks in Photoshop as well. Some people
Yeah,
even made their mock-ups in Illustrator,
Yeah.
which is
yeah,
just kind of not what you use. And I think that the reason why everybody was designing and developing websites that were so locked was we were still early in the days and of the concept around responsive design, because this is like, late
yeah,
2000s, early 2010s. But I think that the shift began to happen probably like with the emergence of the iPhone and
Yeah.
how that became popularized. We suddenly had this, mobile device in our phone. On one hand, people were designing, developing native apps, like, for this platform. And on the other side of the equation, we were trying to adapt these websites in the browser into something that could work well mobile. And I think that that's kind of where this concept of responsive design began to become popularized, because I totally remember around that time when I would look for job listings, one of the requirements would be like knows Photoshop, knows responsive design, knows HTML, CSS. Like
yeah,
responsive
yeah,
design was a key term, and I feel like now it's not like a term you hear a lot because it's almost expected of all of us. And we've also seen
yeah.
CSS evolve its what it offers. Because
Mm-hmm.
when I was, doing a lot of coding back in like 2013, I don't think there was a Flexbox or grid yet. So I was doing everything using like floats and
Yeah.
I was using different gems to kind of use column grids, like call it manually inside of the CSS
Okay.
classes. You remember that, like column 6
Yeah, yeah,
float, like now we don't have to do that, which is amazing. So
yeah. No, for sure.
yeah, so
Yeah, I
I
was just working on the team with someone who did Suzy. I don't know if y'all knew what Suzy was, like where it was like a grid system that like it would do the math and stuff. She was the creator of Suzy, and I actually got to, before I worked with her, I was at a conference talk with her where she was like, "Don't use this anymore, just use grid." And so she's like, "Stop using my thing." So yeah, it's a different world now.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, and there's always all those CSS jokes about centering something, and like it's so much easier. I mean, you can still use like auto margins and stuff to do it, but
Mhm.
like with Flexbox or Grid, don't want to say it's a no-brainer, but it's way easier to center stuff now. Having said that, I still Google some of the stuff anyways, because like, just because I offload it out of my brain. But yeah, no, I think a lot of the CSS changes that have come around in the recent years have definitely helped a lot with in terms of design and just also even some accessibility stuff. Like there's the focus, but there's the focus within. I can't remember when that came out. It's not. I think it's supported in Firefox and Chromium based browsers now, but once again, like I forget it. But there's polyfills and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, I think those
There's
things. Oh,
Go ahead, Lisa.
I think like the development of all these new things are just so awesome because it's like one less minute detail to have to worry about because the overarching job is like to just define like that experience that's going to help people do the thing that they're trying to accomplish, whether it's to discover interesting topics on a developer-based community or to do something else like to chat with their friends, like as long as like the tools we're using kind of removes all that barrier so that the real thinking can be around the communication, how things are placed together, all of those mechanics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other nice thing about CSS now is that for me, when we got grid, that made me realize like most designers in their design, like, whatever they're working with, they're using a grid anyways, like most of the time, right? So designers are using a grid to do the layouts and stuff. And it was so nice to just be able to take those designs that they had with these grids and actually translate it with a grid on the web. And I feel like it just worked so much better working with the designers after that. It was a cool little shift in like the way I was doing things.
Yeah,
It's
and
awesome.
fun fact, the forum code base uses CSS Grid quite a bit, and we definitely have Flexbox too, but there's a lot of CSS Grid in there. We have a little bit of a luxury because we're supporting only like more modern browsers, but I think that's mainly because it stems from our initial community dev was developers, so no, there's not many developers running like IE 8 or 9 on their laptop probably, unless they're testing for like a legacy corporation or something. But yeah.
All right, I'm going to drop back into the questions now that we have in our AMA. If people don't know, I'm going to drop that link again real quick because other people have come in here. So let me put that in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to go through the questions real quick. Let's see. What are some of your, so this is from Gracie. She said, what are some of your absolute favorite design tools or just web tools in general?
Okay.
Oh, that's a good one.
So I day to day for work, I use Figma, which is a screen design tool to draw the boxes when it comes to UI, UX, etc. I like using paper and pencil to sometimes sketch out.
I was about to ask you, what's paper?
Yeah, I thought you meant
Paper?
Dropbox paper.
It's like an app or something.
Physical.
So you said
Physical.
paper, pencil, and then I was like,
Tell me more about this paper technology of yours.
No, sometimes, okay, I mean, like it helps to plan, some of the designs because I find sometimes if you just go straight into using a digital tool first, you get almost over fixated on the perfection of that solution versus the fundamental thing that you're wanting to do. And so I really do think it's important to carve space out, especially in this type of like creative work, to make sure you ask yourself like, okay, am I in a moment where I'm trying to generate as many ideas as possible? Or am I in a moment where I'm trying to converge on some concept and polish it? Because the more that you get into this design role, that's going to be critical because I find like sometimes, at least when I was an early designer, I was just spinning my wheels all the time, coming with solutions, not really know where it's going. And then it takes a while to figure out like your intention behind like what you're doing. I think it's probably similar to like maybe with engineering, you're working on something and you may be running into trouble and you're trying to figure out like, okay, is this where I pause and, you know, try to investigate different directions, or am I sticking with this in this lane and I'm trying to fix this specific thing, you know? And it takes a while to know like what to do. So
for sure.
paper in hand helps isolate that. Like
Yeah.
Pavel introduced me to this really cool tool, which is awesome for async and remote work. It's called Loom. And
Okay.
if someone doesn't know, if whoever doesn't know what it is, it's a screen and camera recording tool on your computer. So let's say you're sharing a design with someone, but you don't just want to take a screenshot or an export file of that massive JPEG and describe it through text. You want to walk people through it. You can do that with Loom. And I think as a designer, in most jobs, communication is an important skill, but I think for the designer, so much of it is influencing other people through your ideas. And so good communication is a part of that. And when I use Loom, I find that it gives me a chance to really showcase the prototype that I'm showing to people and walking through each decision, because it's really hard to like describe each step through text in a Slack message. It's better to just like show the screen, talk people through. And Loom works well asynchronously because we're not on, the same time zones and we don't have meetings about everything. We rely on Slack and other async things first. So, do you use Loom? I love Loom.
Well, I had a question about it. How does it differentiate from like uploading like a MP4 onto Slack, or like just sharing a quick YouTube video? Like, is it just video software that just is easier to share, or is there things where like you can annotate the video, or I'm just curious.
I haven't explored all of the features, but what is nice about it is I press this Loom button and it says, which screen do you want to share? Camera and full screen? And I say yes. And then after I film it and press finish, it gives me this link that I can paste. So what I used to do was like video record myself on QuickTime, but then you have to like deal with this file that is not on your computer and like upload that, and I don't deal with that.
Yeah, it's just these like links that stay on like the web that you get to share with people. That's what Art used when she was explaining the liquid tags, to rhymes, and so it's useful.
Yeah, because I've seen Pavel post links to that a lot in Slack, sometimes in issues or PRs too. So okay, so I guess the main advantage, like you said, is it gets recorded into the cloud, and then anybody that has that shareable link, it removes the friction of getting it to somebody, basically.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, and I think I don't even know. I think I have never paid for it, and I'm still using it, so it seems fine. Whereas I think Cloud App requires you to pay for it if you want your head to show up on the bottom. I might be wrong, but a big part of why I use Loom is that your head can show up on the bottom of the screen, and I really like that.
Yeah.
It's like underrated to not only hear someone's voice, but also to see their facial expressions, and I feel that helps. It goes a long way when it comes to asynchronous communication, to the facial expression.
And also pandemic life right now, so it's kind of nice to see your coworkers' faces. So.
Yeah.
I might go watch some of your Loom videos later just to feel better.
Just to go connect. That's how low are.
Hey, look, Lisa's talking to me.
Yeah. But yeah, like those are the primary tools. Word documents. As a product designer, I'm always like trying to take notes and trying to gather information. So like, okay, how I see my job is I'm facilitating my team coming up with a solution all together. So when I'm working with a team, I'm trying to make sure we're all aligned on the opportunity and problem that we're going after, and that we all are able to surface the ideas that are in our head, bring it all out. And then as a facilitator, I'm taking those ideas and beginning to visualize it, and then sharing it to the team for feedback. And I think that's really interesting to note. Like, I see my job as a facilitator. I don't see my job as a creator. I'm just trying to gather all the information, know, the execs say they need, what the engineers are thinking about, and I'm just trying to visualize it. But I think that's an awesome skill set, and I'm really happy that I get to do this as a product designer because I saw the statistic that like there's a huge proportion of like people who are visual learners, but at a certain point in our education system, at least in the US, we do away with visual like learning and we prioritize like, you know, oral comprehension. And I think what's really exciting about being a product designer is I can show people what the solution could be. We haven't invested in like even writing up a single line of code. We're merely just talking about it. And it's all like decision making and like it's just like, oh, I'm just bringing things together. And I think that's exciting because I know for me personally, I always felt like I was more of a visual learner, but I was never like being met where I was at when I was in school, you know? And so like to be able to kind of use what felt like a setback for me and to use it as a strength at work as an adult feels really cool.
Yeah. I like the collaborative aspect that you brought up there because everybody has ideas, you know, and I've been in tons of meetings where somebody says something and then they're like, "Oh my God, that's a great idea," you know, and it like that wouldn't have happened unless like, you know, I'm not saying you have to have your entire we're a small team, so putting the team together is a little easier, but you know, like ideas can come from anywhere. You don't even have to be somebody technical or designer. It could be like, you know, I'm picturing something like if my mom were to say like I'm trying to do this on the website, it's not the, you know, and then like, you know, maybe something she said is like, oh, okay, well that would make it easier, you know, like it's just cool pulling the ideas from everywhere. And yeah, no, I think it's a good thing we have. um, and I like what we do. You were saying like with the Word doc, we typically use Google Docs where at Forum, and I really like the collaborative aspect of that with the comments and like just suggesting something, and it's just kind of nice to you also feel part of the experience, you know. And the other thing I was gonna say is I like what you said as well because I know when I was younger in my developer journey, like your reflex is to okay, they gave me a task or a feature, okay, start coding. You know, it's you know like take a step back. You know, like what is the problem we're trying to solve, or is this even the problem we're supposed to solve before we even tackle it? You know, and
100.
and I can think of a vivid example of we've been working on, I think it was like about a month ago, you had been showing us, or maybe a month and a half ago, showing us the flow of the login process, and you were showing us different views in Figma, you know, so like once again, like you said, no code is done yet. This is just like probably quick mock-ups for yourself to do, but like, you know, here's one scenario, here's another, and then we started formulating like, okay, maybe take a bit of that with this, and you know, it's and it's fun, and I think I'm a visual learner too. Like I understand things better if it's, you know, a good picture can really like solidify an idea. So
Yeah, definitely.
I think what happens sometimes is we're all like, let's imagine we're like 5 people in a meeting and we're talking about this concept. And if we haven't all agreed on what we're seeing yet, we're talking about it, we're using the same words, but we might be seeing totally different things in our heads. So how can we think we're talking about the same thing if we're not totally actually in agreement that what we're looking at is what we're looking at? And when like over the course of like my career, like when I've been in these types of rooms, when I wasn't working in a remote office environment, but working like in a physical office environment, what I might do is I might just walk up to like the whiteboard in the room and start drafting something as people are
okay,
talking. And so, and then at some point, the conversation kind of ends, and I bring people to the whiteboard and say, okay, this is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing this. I'm hearing that. What do we think about this? And it really is so much about like facilitation, and
yeah,
that's so cool. I like working with people. So
yeah. No, it working siloed just it's a little old school, I think, you know, like it's good to get the ideas from people. I'm trying to think of the software I was using when I worked at Autodesk before, come in the dev forum, sorry. It it's not a Luma board, but what was it called? But basically, it was a big whiteboard, and then like we would talk about problems or topics, and people would start creating post-it notes, and then we would start grouping the similar questions or ideas, and then once we had all that together, then it's like then we're like, okay, now we can start, actually doing something, and it's
You can do that
more
online with
consistent.
Miro.
Yes,
Yeah,
Miro.
yeah. There's Miro. I think Josh had suggested Miro, but
Hmm.
I forget what the other one was. But anyways, it was a paid service. Not that it's a bad thing that it's paid, but it was just there's so many
Was
collaborative
it called
online software.
Jamboard? Rafi asked if it was called Jamboard. Do you remember?
N- no, I feel like it started with an M, but it wasn't Miro. It's gonna come to me after the stream. I'm gonna be going to bed tonight, and I'm gonna be like, ah.
That was it.
It was called Mood Board. No, just kidding.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, there
yeah.
you go. All right. I'm going to ask you another question if you're cool with that.
No,
Lisa.
no, just kidding. I
No?
know.
Okay. Okay. So this is from Steve Marcano. He said, I think you answered the first part of this. I'm going to go to the second part and third part. Do you think it's possible to make the move from developer to product designer? That's the first question. And then the second question, I can repeat these after. What are some key skills you think you need for your role?
Mm. So the first one, can I move from developer to product designer? Yes, because I've seen it happen. I had this one friend a few years ago who was a developer leaning towards front end who met up with me because he was interested in my background as a product designer and was asking me like advice on how to make that transition. And it's hard for me to give like advice specifically to people in that position because I've never been a developer transitioning to a product designer, so I can only answer from my point of view. But if you're working in an environment where there is an opportunity to flex some design skills, let's say you work with a designer at your company, or there is no designer, but you see that there could be a need for it. Try to find ways to insert yourself while you're still working in that workplace so that you can practice it. And this is what I've seen a lot of people do in like my past, where they've made one transition to one type of role to another. They did it within that company because
Yeah.
hopefully it's a place that gives you support to be able to do that. As a developer trying to transition into a product designer kind of role, I would say that, and this kind of answers the second question, which is like
Yeah.
the key skills. I would say find ways to, first of all, gather your understanding of the fundamentals of art, which is just, understanding color theory, understanding typography, understanding why things look well when they're placed together. And some things you can do to practice this is to begin to collect visuals and imagery that inspire you. In some ways, like create a mood board. I remember when I got started in design, I was always like really into the internet, always really into following different graphic designers, and I'd bookmark their things. I was on Dribble, and I would favorite a lot of different things and do the same on Pinterest and on Tumblr. And every so often, I would revisit a lot of these places and just like look at them and like admire what I was looking at. And it's taking repetition and patterning to kind of build the muscles in your brain to recognize what looks good and what doesn't look as good. And once you're able to train your brain to do that, you'll be able to practice it much more easily when it comes to like work. One thing you can also do to improve this skill set is to literally like get screenshots of like if you want to become really good at like UI, product design, want to improve your visual skills, I would recommend taking screenshots of Apple-based apps like the music app or the podcast app if you're on Apple, or other apps that you think have really excellent visual design. Download Figma and just literally like take the screenshot and draw boxes around the screenshot and copy everything that you see so that your brain can begin to process why this looks good, why these two things these two type sizes like look good together, and you just want to train your muscles. And a part of this too is also like beginning to recognize when you see something that feels off, just begin to ask yourself like, why do I think this looks off? This white text in this red box, I don't know what it is about this, but it looks off. Like try to force yourself to write down what it is and try to come up with a solution instead of that. So much of this is just training your brain to like develop that visual taste. But it takes a long time. And I was talking to my old manager. He's a design manager, and he's managed a bunch of different people over his like 20-year career. And he says like, I've worked with so many senior designers, but I would say like even if you're senior, one of the hardest skills to like improve even further at is visual design, because you can do UX. It's pretty straightforward. It's really just a series of guidelines and you're trying to follow it. User research, it's interesting, but there's also a process to it. But visual design, it's just like to get to that next level, like in a way that feels like innovative and it's really pushing things forward. It's always like,
I can totally relate to that, because one, I'm not a designer, and anytime I've like tried to like my blog, which is, it's really more for the content, not how it looks, but I'm using a template right now. But anytime I've tried to design stuff, like I've tried to follow some things, but I know I don't have that trained eye. Like I 100% know I don't, and I'm sure my mom would be something like, oh no, it's a pretty picture, but no, I'm sorry, it's not good. But it really is true, because like I know that exact feeling where you look at something and you're like, oh my god, this is awesome, and then you look at another thing and you're like, it doesn't look bad, but I can't put my finger on what is not good about it, you know? And it's,
well, Lisa and you and I were talking about this yesterday, and I think one of the advantages you can have as a developer is if you do work with designers, come up with something and see if they'll be willing to like look into it and tell you, like give you some advice. Because we were talking about like I did this in Figma when I was coming up with my portfolio and how I wanted my website to look. And if you see like the progression of like what I had initially and then all the comments they gave me and the way that we like perfected it and got it better, it was so much better after I got like some advice from designers that I knew, that I just like, I reached out to and I was like, hey, could you look at this for me? Give me some advice. And just some of those things that you just don't think about as a developer necessarily until like a designer points it out, like the different like margins and spacing and stuff like that. It's so helpful if you have other people there kind of just helping you along. So
for sure. And that's one thing I've noted. That's one thing I know I've gotten better at, is spacing things, because I remember like back in the day I was just all about jamming in my content, you know, and now that, because like even for readability, like I think it's there's the CH unit in CSS, and I think the sweet spot's between 65 and 85 maybe, but you know what I mean. That's why you never see text like going from one side of the screen to the other. It's always kind of tucked
except
in
on
the
old
middle.
Websites, they're still like that.
Exactly. Or if you're on a restaurant website and you're downloading the PDF of the menu.
And that's one of those examples of, you know, because I remember learning, when I learned typography in university, it was through the basics of, you know, print design. And that's where we learned like, okay, book designs, this is the principle, 65 to 80 characters. And we took everything that we learned there and translated it to the digital realm. But, you know, we're going to have some stragglers like those early websites that was just like that.
But it's so true how like and that's like a little change, just saying 65 to 80 and I remember when I made the change after I had read about it, I was reading like no particular post on my website, but I'm like, it is a lot easier to read, because when you're going like literally like this, it's like, you know, it's
when I was teaching at a boot camp, our the area that they went into to study, like, because we taught online and then like for 2 hours, and then they also had like their what they called the TK, where they'd go and read stuff. And for some reason, like it was spread all the way across. And that was like the biggest complaint for students. And students hated it so much that they came up with like a little just like browser extension just to make it so that like until like the designer finally did it. It's like, can we just make it more readable? Like just squeeze it. It's like it's so much better if you just think about those types of things.
And you touched on another thing, Lisa, uh, typography, like pairing fonts and all that. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's something you specialize in, because I know there's people that specialize just in typography. So it's like, yeah, I find it interesting, like the way I've
My
gone about
brother-in-law.
picking stuff. Oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, he's a designer at REI, and he does all the like typography.
What a
And
cool job, a designer at
yeah.
REI.
Yeah, and he does
Because
actually a lot of the shirts and things that they have. He's the one that like he does like the hand lettering and all that kind of stuff. So
So probably more
uh,
like illustrator slash designer.
yeah, he does. He kind of like straddles both. Like yeah. So
but
Cool.
it is interesting, like the pairing of the font, because like typically what I've used is like Google Fonts, and they have suggested pairings.
yeah.
I because I read in a few spots. I think I read it on CSS Tricks and another site, but just take that cognitive load off of you and just go with some stuff there, because otherwise it's the kind of thing like, one, I'm not a designer again. I would probably spend like 2 weeks like, does that font go with that font? I don't know, and then I haven't delivered anything.
I would say like I'm probably more like you though, Nick. Like I feel like I'm
Mhm.
a very practical designer. Like I'm gonna do the thing that makes sense. There probably are other people that are extremely into, visual design to this point that I'm not. But I say to myself, I just want to do like a good enough job where people can read this and it'll be okay. Because I feel like there's always a trade-off that you make where if you have someone that's extremely specialized in this thing, then they lose out in this other thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I'm very generalist though. I do user research and front-end development, which is I want to put it out there. It's at this company right now at Forum, our product designers, they do coding, but that's definitely not the expectation in other places. So I just
Yeah.
want to put that out there for people who are like trying to understand what we do here, because we keep talking about code.
Yeah.
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 But
Well,
it helps to understand some HTML, CSS too. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what we were talking about with a developer. If a developer knows a little bit about design, they're better able to talk to a designer. If a designer knows a little bit about code or more or whatever, it's easier to talk to the developers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also been
Um,
helpful to me because I'm pretty much the only front end right now, so
I
it's
know, I
improved.
know.
But
soon, you're
having
getting
said,
better.
yeah, having said that though, we've had a lot of great contributions from the community as well. They're in the chat, like Rafi linked to 20. That's Andrew
Mm-hmm.
Bone, and I think Rafi 993's name is Rafi, but I'm not positive. Rafi, if
Yeah,
let me
we
know
keep
in the
calling you
chat.
Rafi because you don't have any other name on anything we can find. Because we're gonna shout you out again next week because
Yeah,
you did some PRs again. So let us know,
he's gonna
Rafi.
be like, my name's Winston. I don't know.
What if we just only call people by their name, though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't go on a tangent, but I have trouble figuring out who people are on Twitter if I don't know their handle. Like when I hear a
Oh
real
yeah.
name, sometimes I'm like, oh, you mean, so and so. Anyways, yeah, you were gonna pull another question, I think, Christina.
Yep. I thought this was a good question. So there's kind of a lot to this. You can pick what you want, but they said so there's three questions here. How's being a product designer? I think more to that is probably this question. What are your obstacles? And then what are some recommendation for product designing and inspiration? Which I think you touched on a little, but you still can. Okay, it is Rafi, by the way.
Oh, Rafi. Oh, okay. How is it being a product designer? I really like this job that I get to do because I think it works well for me. It took me a while to kind of figure out like, okay, what do I want to do? I like it because again, I get to work with teams of people to facilitate something that hopefully at the end of the day we're all happy with. And I get to connect what we build with, people who will eventually use what we, make. And
Yeah.
so that's really exciting. And there's a lot of different methods to doing that. And there's always something to learn. Um, the design is so broad. And what are some of the obstacles to being a product designer? I think interesting. it's not that there aren't obstacles. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
think of what to focus on. I will say contextual to this to right now, because I mentioned that at Forum we were product designers that code, and I feel like sometimes there are some things that we lose from that. And I can also speak from experience at my first tech job where I was working at ThoughtBot, which is an agency specializing in software development. And all of the designers that they hired had to code for our clients. And I feel like the downside of being a product designer that also codes is sometimes you get really into the solution, and sometimes it's really hard to like remember, like, you know, a lot of people see your asset there as being this creative person that's able to think expansively, but once you start to implement the solutions, you begin to really think narrowly. So like I know for me, I do have to like try really hard to carve out the space and ask myself like, what am I doing here? Have I decided the solution and now I'm just implementing it? Or am I still open-minded to like shifting, changing thing? And that's just something that I, keep, figuring out. And I look forward to Dev having more front-end developers that can support me and Pavel, and hopefully our growing design team as we begin to touch more and more things. But I think it's like fun so far because over the past few years I was working in an environment where I wasn't doing any coding, and sometimes I could see like how just even adding some rules in terms of the code could make things easier for my developer colleagues. Um, yeah, so, but it's probably all my problem because I prefer being a generalist, and that's kind of what I've decided. So this is all my fault. I
Well,
don't know.
You're doing an awesome job if
Does
it's
that
your
make
fault.
sense? Yeah.
But yeah, no, yeah, it kind of touches what we were talking about yesterday, where if you start thinking about the tech behind what you want to like, it does curb the creative aspect of it. Like like I think we were saying, when you create something, you shouldn't think about the limitations that'll come after. Like, just get your creative juices going, and then somebody after can say, well, we can't do this because of the current tech maybe, but and then we have some discussions and then like still come up with something really awesome. But yeah.
Yeah, that's the challenge.
All right. Ask you another question. So, how did you come about finding and joining the dev community? Were you a part of it like before you came, and then eventually the dev team, like becoming
Such a
part of
good
the dev team?
story. Such a good story. Okay, so let's take us back to university. I'm in my last year, and I'm now at this point. I'm like making my websites. I'm making WordPress themes, learning
Yep.
PHP, learning all about this world. I have a Twitter account, so I'm following a bunch of people who share things that I find valuable. I have a Dribble, and Peter Frank, who is one of the C execs at from Dev. He was an old like colleague of mine, and we had mutual friends. And he found out about me and how I was someone that could design things. And he had this idea for this textbook exchange service for university students, because what happens is if once you finish a year at university, you end up with $300 of worth of
Yep.
books that you now have to sell, and no one's going to buy it, so you just spent like so much money on books, and you're going to
Yep.
get more books for the next semester. At least this is for American universities. I don't know what
Yeah.
it's like in other countries. So expensive.
Yeah.
We're you there. I got it. Yep.
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it's like
and
that in
so
Canada too.
So Peter, like I met with Peter, and he told me how he knew this developer named Ben Halpern, and we could all be a 3-person team to design and develop this app called text.com that would allow college students to meet with each other, post the different textbooks they want to sell and buy, and exchange them. So that was my first foray into foray. Oh, that's what foray. I can't not pronounce that word.
Yeah.
Foray
Yep.
into foray into product design. I was now graduating from web design into product design, because I wasn't just designing a website that was for someone to read and post to, I was trying to think of how I can help Peter with this business idea that he had. And so this was also my first time doing user research. Well, like kind of a little bit of it. It was my first time like going through the traditional process of sketching out ideas, wireframing it, translating it into mock-ups that I would share with Ben, and he and I would implement it in our Rails app. And yeah, we learned a lot. I learned a lot from that experience. I mentioned user research, but we didn't do any user research, and that was a big lesson. I realized like we were building something that we shouldn't have built because we didn't have validation that was how people would use it. For example, we designed and developed this in-app chat feature, but we realized after building it that people probably prefer to just text each other. Like it would have been easier to just like share, just do that. And so we spent time and labor doing that. But it was an amazing opportunity for me, and that led to like the first job that I had at the agency, because I think they were really impressed that I was able to be a part of a team that helped, shape and ship this thing that people could be using, and they saw a lot of promise in that. So I had an apprenticeship with them, and then over the next few years, I worked as a product designer at Facebook for both their events and their trust and safety team, which is really cool, and I learned a lot there. And I wasn't coding at all there, so it was a really awesome time for me to just focus on becoming a stronger product designer in that discipline. And after that, I freelanced, and while I was freelancing, it was just a way for me to like work with different types of companies and formats to see kind of what environment I preferred working in. And towards the end of that, I get this random email from Peter, and he says, "Hey Lisa, like I saw that you're freelancing, you're an independent contractor. So we're actually looking for a designer at Dev. We have this idea of making communities possible beyond just our developer community. So think Illustrator community." He knew me because he knows I'm an illustrator. And so that was kind of how I came back full circle around back to Peter and Ben. And I've been really proud of, all that they've done so far when I joined, and it was awesome. It's funny because when I got the email from Peter, he said, "Yeah, you should come back. I promise we're more organized this time." Because we all three of us, we were just in a different place with like what it's normal, like when you're at a certain place here, you have certain information, and now we all have different information, and it's been pretty cool to be a part of the team and to see how large it's grown. And to I think one of the most valuable things is being at this company and knowing that with any of my colleagues, we have a similar vision of how we think of this community platform, and I think we have the same image of it, and I think that's really valuable. Yeah, so that's the story. I don't know if you know that.
I did not know this story.
Really?
So this is cool.
Yeah.
I'm learning too, and I think that's a cool story.
Yeah, no, it's I only know about it because we actually went on a offsite before the pandemic happened, so she had told us this, or I think Peter might have told it. Yeah, it's a cool story, and it is kind of like just general job advice, I guess, is one, don't burn bridges with people and lean on your network. Like most of the jobs I've had in my career, aside from maybe a couple which were through a recruiter, have all been through people I know. So yeah,
100%. And also, don't be afraid to reach out to people online that you don't know yet, but maybe you live in the same area, or even if you don't, with, I guess, the pandemic, everyone's more open to meeting people online in general. I've met some of the people that are my friends and also like close contacts through Twitter and other things, and it's so valuable. Also don't just pursue these relationships because you want a job. Like,
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have like a genuine interest in other people, that as just a general principle for life. But like those genuine relationships can like be really rewarding, and you don't even know how. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I find jobs can just come out of nowhere. It's like uh, I played rugby for many years, and for whatever reason, every now and then it just comes up in a conversation, and then as soon as I bring it up, somebody's like, "Oh, I know so and so who played too. Do you know them?" Like within where I live, but like also they might know somebody that plays, and then it just gets down to a conversation, and then it's and then all of a sudden, hey, well, yeah, I've got this job. You want to, it's like just. Well, I mean, I'm just my first job actually was from somebody I played rugby with, so it's just yeah, no, it can really come out of anywhere, and I like your point about because people always talk about networking. I know we're going off design off
No, this
tangent
is
here,
this is
but
great. This is fantastic.
I personally hate the word networking because to me it sounds like a forced thing. Like it just means meet people. Like obviously tech meetups are great because it's people that work in your space, but there's so many other things, like I mean I played a lot of sports, so like just being on a team, you meet like when I started university, I knew nobody at my university. I started playing rugby and I knew 70 people immediately, and a lot of them became my friends over time. And it could be anything. You could be in like some comic book club, just quirky things, and like you just
Yep.
meet people from all interesting walks of life. And like you said, it's like don't do this to like maybe I'll get a job at some point. Like do it to meet other people, and like the job stuff like that might happen, it might not, but it's you just never know, right? But it's just good to, and especially like you said during the pandemic, like I go to I think I go to this virtual coffee that I started going to in about maybe
Oh,
March, or might have been early April. One of our community members runs it, Becca Howard Weigel, and she had tweeted it out, and I just like you said, I didn't know her. She's on Code Newbies every now and then, so I remember replying to her for a few things, but I just said, hey, I'd like to come to the virtual coffee, and then I went, and then like I started going more and more, and you know, just just know more people now because of that, and it's because I never had internet friends before that. Like I've always just been like people I know in real life. The people
yeah.
on Twitter I follow or whatever is just like it's just people I follow. So it's been kind of interesting for me in that respect too. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I knew Becca from a mom and tech thing a while ago before that. So it's been cool to see other people kind of like join the virtual coffees and things like that. She
Yeah.
is one of my online friends. We've never actually met in person, but we talk all the time.
Yeah.
So it's one of those weird things. Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually just finished a contract with a company where I was doing animations, and I like happened to get that because a while ago I went to a Vue conference, and Miriam, who I was working with, she was a speaker there. She didn't know Vue. I didn't really know Vue, but I wanted to go because I was doing animations, and Sarah Drasner was there, and um, so we just hung out because both of us knew like CSS and not really Vue, which was funny. And now we just got finished working on a project together where we were working in Vue, so it was interesting. Like she had just reached out to me like, "Hey, I know you do animations. You want to work on this project?" I'm like, "Yes." Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
It's a weird circling. Yeah.
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 Um, so I think we hit most of the questions, at least some of them were kind of like repeats, and we're about to hit that like hour and a half mark. So I don't know if you
Yeah.
have any other thoughts, Lisa, you want to share before we head out, or anything else you want to kind of touch on before we kind of close.
Yeah. Or any
This was
shameless
really
plugs.
Yeah.
shameless plugs. Oh, I don't have too many.
No worries. No worries.
I stay tuned for more of these Wednesday walkthroughs.
Yes, actually, if
Yeah.
for anyone who joined again, I know some people came in a little bit later. We actually want to have Lisa come on again and kind of actually talk um, more about like design and how, as developers, like some of the things we can do to be better at design and using some of the tools, like something like Figma. We had talked about Figma, and she uses Figma a lot, and it's free, and it's a nice thing to kind of get acquainted with and know how to use. So we would love to have her on again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. For selfish reasons, I would love to have you on again
Yes.
because it'd be cool to dig into Figma stuff because I feel like I know the bare minimum of it and I know it does a lot of stuff. So that would be cool to do or
Yeah.
anything you want to talk about because this has been like super interesting convo for me. So
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this. So.
Perfect. No, this was
Me
fun,
too.
and I'll definitely come back with Figma and more things that I can share. Yeah, thank
Awesome.
you for all the questions, everybody that asked questions.
Yeah, no, it's super great.
Everyone in the
Bef
chat, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Yeah. I'm gonna pour one out for the chat.
you.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
before we cut out, do you think you could just pop Lisa's Twitter in there if people want to give her a follow?
Yes, I did
Um,
earlier, but it
oh,
was
okay.
probably covered up. So now I can put it again.
Twitter,
And
Twitter
yeah,
world. This is where I make
Twitter.
some friends.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Wow.
Yo,
We
what's up,
get it.
Twitter?
Why don't you want to go in there? There we go. I put it in the chat.
Cool. All
Awesome.
right, so yeah, like I said, Christina, I think we'll wrap up. Thanks for coming today, everybody, and super awesome thank you to, I say awesome too much, I think. Thanks, Lisa, so much for coming on today. It was really a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm really glad you're my coworker because you're pretty awesome. All right, said it one more time.
Yeah.
Great.
Last thing we'll say is that we are doing another one of these next week with Vitahe, who's another coworker of ours, and we're going to be talking and touching kind of like on the back end of Forum and talking about all that fun stuff.
Cool, cool. All right, well, thanks, everybody. See you later.